listening to Crossing Streams, the nature-made podcast where crossing streams is socially acceptable. And now, here's your host of Crossing Streams, Critter Cass.
Welcome to Crossing Streams with Critter Cass, the nature-made podcast where crossing streams is socially acceptable, and I'm your host, Critter Cass. And today I have my guest speaker is Tony Vorwald with Jackson County Conservation. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Cass. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. What do you do for Jackson County Conservation?
All sorts of stuff, kind of depends on the day. But I guess my job description title is I'm a naturalist for Jackson County Conservation.
What a coincidence. I'm also a naturalist. So,
who would have guessed?
Yeah, I know. Who would have guessed? Tony and I know each other kind of through work. We actually met on a trip that we'll talk about a little bit later in the podcast. But we're both naturalists for Iowa's County Conservation System. So what does that entail for you? It might look different from me. It might look different from somebody else who's also a naturalist in Iowa. So what does your job entail?
Right. Yeah. This is interesting, and I'm sure we'll talk more on it. But the naturalist job title is an interesting one. There's definitely some commonalities between all of us, but definitely for me, I'm involved in a lot of environmental conservation, outdoor recreation education through Jackson County. So doing a lot of, depending on the time of the year, summer camps, public outreach, volunteer coordination, going into schools, talking on different topics. Also do, for myself personally, been doing more like habitat restoration projects on some of the remnant prairies that Jackson County Conservation manages. So I've been doing more of that kind of, sorry for saying it a million times, doing more work in the fields in kind of a restoration sort of way, which is where a big part of my heart is. And I've been doing more of that over the last few years, and hopefully that kind of trajectory continues. Also I'm involved with the Iowa Conservation Education Coalition, which does a lot of workshops and stuff for formal educators to bring in conservation environmental education into their classroom.
Yeah, that's super cool. Kind of adding on to like bringing like the formal educators into the environmental education classroom. I feel like a lot of our roles as naturalists transitions to bringing the outdoors inside. And me personally, I want to bring them like out, So, but it's really cool that you offer those workshops with the teachers through your conservation board. So that's amazing. So where are you originally from?
I'm originally from Jackson County, Iowa. So the job that I currently have is not too far away from home. I grew up on a small farm in rural Jackson County in between Dubuque and Maquoketa, Iowa. So the east coast of the great state of Iowa near the Mississippi River. So I'm originally from a small little farm out there and grew up dinking around with cows, hunting and fishing. And the farm I grew up on wasn't a big farm. It was a pretty small one. So farming wasn't like our main source of income growing up, but I have a little bit of that in my blood and in my background. So yeah. Bernard's been going on kind of right in there.
Yeah, right on. That's awesome. Not to like throw shade at my part of the state, and I'll talk a little about me in here in a few seconds. But the eastern side of Iowa is my favorite place in the world. If I could like travel to Cancun or go to Bellevue, Iowa specifically, I'd go to Bellevue every day, all day. So
right. And we'll talk about this at some point in one of these episodes. Iowa gets overlooked. It's a flyover state considered by many, but there is a lot to love, and there's a lot of gems, and there's a lot of magic here in Iowa that people don't even realize unless kind of almost if you're a local or at least a stater for sure. There's a lot of gems that people would have no idea that was within our state boundary. In eastern Iowa in particular, I'm a little bit biased, but eastern Iowa, northeast Iowa has some amazing stuff.
Yeah, you have just really cool geography over there too that's often overlooked. Or if people see pictures, they're like, oh, that's not from Iowa. And it's like, yeah, it is. So super bluffy, really cool. When I was little, I would call them Iowa mountains. So yeah, I didn't know that they weren't mountains. That's just so mountain-esque over there. It's got really cool area.
Here's a little trivia question for you, Cass. Back in the old days, like the old French fur trade days, when they kind of thought they were mountains, do you know what the mountains in northeast Iowa, south of Wisconsin, what they called them?
I don't think that I do. I love trivia facts. Hit me with it.
Ukuch Mountains.
Call it what?
The Ukuch Mountains. So the hills within the driftless area, especially, along the Wisconsin River in northeast Iowa, southeast Minnesota. A name for those hills, at least in the old-timey sense, was the Ukuch Mountains.
Ukuch. Can you spell that?
Oh, man.
You don't have to.
Try.
I put you on the spot, but...
Ochooch, I think. Something like that.
Okay, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it. The Ukuch Mountains. That's super neat. So we kind of jumped right into about like what a naturalist is. And so I'll kind of take the reins with that again and pull it back to a little bit more about me. So my name is not Critter Cass naturally. The kids always ask me, like, is your first name Critter and last name Cass? It is not. My name is actually Cassandra Alfstad. So there's my alter ego, I guess. And I'm not originally from Southwest Iowa. I work for Montgomery County Conservation. My office is out of Red Oak, which is lovingly called the heart of Southwest Iowa. So if you come to our little shops, you can get yourself a Heart of Iowa or Heart of Southwest Iowa postcard. But I moved down here specifically for work. I'm from Iowa. I grew up in Indianola, Iowa, so just south of Des Moines. And then I went to school in Missouri at Northwest Missouri State, and I have a degree in general biology with an emphasis in zoology and wildlife ecology and conservation. So I pretty much had no life during my undergrad. And then I got this job right out of college, which I think is super cool because this job is extremely hard to get. So, talking with other naturalists and other people who work in other places in surrounding states. And I learned this on our Minnesota trip too, because Kirsten Beret, I don't know how, Beret, I think that's how you pronounce her last name. She's a naturalist for Carroll County now. Give her a little shout out. She does some really cool stuff. Yeah, she was saying, she's from Minnesota originally, and she was saying how they would source people from Minnesota to Iowa to work in the conservation department or conservation field, and then to gain experience to work elsewhere, which I thought was super interesting. Like, I would have never accredited to Iowa with having that, like, rate of conservation resources, so...
I think Iowa is pretty unique with having the county conservation system where every county in Iowa has a conservation board and they all kind of operate similarly with the director and parks and park rangers, sometimes nature centers, sometimes naturalists, and a lot of other states don't have that. And there is a little bit more opportunity, I would think, that maybe some more entry-level jobs in the conservation field. So that sort of makes sense with folks from other states like Minnesota coming to Iowa to work to gain experience for other ventures.
Yeah, I just thought that was super interesting. And I've talked with other people from other states, and they're like, I've never heard of anybody coming into my classroom to talk to my kids about nature like you hear about from Iowa. So big shout out to Iowa's system there. Where did you go to college, Tony?
Yeah, so I have a little bit of a roundabout college journey. I started off at Hawkeye Community College in Waterloo, Iowa, and they have an awesome natural resources management associates program. So I started off there, and once I finished at Hawkeye and earned my associates, I transferred to the University of Dubuque. It's an awesome little university where I got my bachelor's of science in environmental science. Then after I graduated my undergrad, I moved to Minnesota, so I have a lot of Minnesota love, like Kristen there. And while I was up there working and doing some residential environmental learning center stuff, I earned a graduate certificate in environmental education. And right now, I am about a month away, if all things go according to plan, with finishing out my master's degree in integrated natural resources management. So still sort of in college, but sort of at the very end of it, maybe.
Yeah, that's super exciting. What made you want to pursue your graduate degree, your master's?
Right, yeah. I originally, when I was in high school and I started thinking about going to college, I wasn't, like a lot of kids didn't know what they wanted to do. I wasn't even sure I wanted to go to college until I found out that Hawkeye had a natural resources program. And that's kind of when I was turned on to conservation as a career. And I went to that program more or less because my brother was going to the University of Northern Iowa, which is really close to Hawkeye Community College, and we could live together. And I got there and then kind of fell in love with the whole career field, and it kind of took off from there. The big reason is, we can talk about it, maybe it'd be a bigger topic for a different episode. But when I was in Minnesota as a part of my compensation for where I was working through, I earned that graduate certificate in environmental education. It was basically like I would say a third of a master's degree credit wise.
Yeah.
So I was sitting on, a decent amount of graduate credit for a long time. And with having that, I always thought someday I would go back and finish out my master's because I had so much credit already. Then the pandemic hit and we had a whole lot of time on our hands for a while. And I thought to myself, like, well, I have a few career goals that were kind of changing at the time. And I want to be spending more time in the field and also spending a lot more time just like not interacting with the public like we do normally with our job. And it's all hindsight now. But
right.
If I would have known that we had so much time on our hands, I could have finished out my master's. We didn't know the pandemic was going to hit, but if I did, I could have, had spent all that time doing my master's degree. Then I decided to finish it out, like now or never sort of thing. And
yeah, like you've already committed enough time to it and energy. So
right. So that was the catalyst for it. So yeah.
Yeah, super cool. And how long have you been with Jackson County Conservation specifically?
Almost 5 years full time. Not quite. This spring will be 5 years full time. But when I was an undergrad before I moved up to Minnesota, Wisconsin, I did do 2 summers as a environmental education intern with Jackson County Conservation. So 2 years as an intern. Then I left the state for a while, then came back, and almost 5 years full time.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'll be 3 years full time with Montgomery County Conservation this April, which has just flown by. I started during the pandemic, which kind of seems surreal, and I was super grateful for a consistent paycheck still and being able to kind of do some virtual education here and there, but everyone was, running like a chicken with their heads cut off. So
sure,
it was just hectic for a lot of people.
How about you? I know you said you went to Northwest Missouri State. Is that correct?
Yes. Yep.
How did you kind of get into the fields or into your, at least college-wise?
Yeah, education and college-wise, I knew, like, ever since I was little, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, the whole big topic of our podcast today is just what got us into nature, and kind of what got us maybe into our fields more or just into our hobbies, too. I personally teach a lot of my hobbies, so we'll touch on more of that later. So for sake of kind of keeping this part short and sweet, having known that I wanted to go into the field of conservation, the area kind of constantly changed that I wanted to go into. For a while, like growing up, I was like, oh, marine biologist. And then I feel like that's every kid's dream. And then whenever I was in high school, I got really into Jane Goodall, and I was like pretty like heavily set on being a primatologist or a cultural anthropologist. And I've read almost all of her books, and I watched anthropological documentaries just for the fun of it. And whenever I got to college, I actually took an anthropology course and did some comparative anatomy studies, and I was really thinking that was the path that I was going to pursue. So that would have looked like something maybe like being overseas a lot or working on habitat restoration in other countries. And then I worked for the Science Center of Des Moines, which is a super cool place. There's a lot of really good resources. And if you're considering going into the field, even if you don't live in Iowa, but if you live in any or around any larger city with a science center, you should definitely try to get in there, whether it's volunteer hours or I was fortunate to get a full-time job there for a summer gig between, classes during college. But I think that really helped kind of fuel and streamline where I actually wanted to go. That wasn't just this abstract concept of maybe I'll go do this, because I am a person who likes, a solid environment. I want a home base, but that other field wouldn't have let me have that home base. So after I worked at the Science Center, the next summer I was a seasonal naturalist for Lake Aquabi State Park in Indianola, Iowa. And after doing that, I worked with the Warren County Conservation Board too. And that just filled my heart with just so much content and passion. It felt like that's where I wanted to be. So probably about my junior year of college, I started just really gearing my mindset towards that environmental education. And fortunately, a lot of my wildlife courses through Northwest had a lot of flexibility, and the topics learned in that I'm able to convey to other people still today. So I just had a nursing home program about deer aging, for example. So it just really happened to work out perfect that my courses that I was already taking through Northwest are very applicable to this field because it's such a flexible field, which is amazing. So, yeah.
That's awesome.
So
yeah, thanks for sharing. I wasn't 100% sure on your background, so it's good to know.
Yeah, right on. So for those of you who are listening currently, it might kind of sound like we're talking a lot about background stuff, which might, be hit or miss with some people. So if you've hung on this long, I appreciate it. I just think it's really important to understand where your roots are from, because it kind of lets you understand and have a better grasp on wherever somebody else's life is coming from, whether it's somebody who's passionate about nature, or maybe they're super not passionate about nature. Maybe they hate hunting, which I love to hunt. So, it's just interesting to help understand where people are coming from, learning about their backgrounds. So,
and it's definitely a good way to, as the pilot episode, to get to know the background of the folks talking. And
yeah, right on.
Show progresses. You don't need to talk about backgrounds quite as often.
Yeah, I introduced you as a guest, but secretly I hope that Tony is like either a co-host or an extremely regular guest on this podcast.
Yeah, I would love to be a co-host, Cass. I don't want to inject myself into your project because you're kind of the boss here, but I would love to be a collaborator as much as I can.
Yeah, no, that's totally okay. Tony approached me. I brought up the idea, and we'll talk about our Boundary Waters trip here, which was a summer training, which is super cool. We get to do some really amazing experiences with the Iowa Association of Naturalists for various trainings throughout the year to help develop our professional development hours if you want to obtain those, or just to go and interact with people. But on this trip, I brought up this podcast, and Tony, was like scooted over closer, was talking to me about it. And then a couple weeks ago, he sent me an email, and I was so glad that he sent me that email, because it got me got this new fire lit so I could actually have a catalyst to start this, because before it was just me like twiddling my thumbs and being like, nobody wants to hear me have a conversation with myself. So but yeah, okay, let's jump into some episode related content. As naturalists, we kind of explore a lot of different areas that we convey to people. We are environmental educators. I don't know if that was made clear or not. I feel like I might have jumped over that a little bit because I'm just excited. Pilot episode. But we're an environmental education team, and that might look different from each county, like I had mentioned at the very beginning. So I personally do like 90% in-school programming, where Tony sounds like he's doing more field work. Is that correct?
Yeah, my in-school programming is definitely more heavy in the colder seasons, and we do our environmental education team here at Jackson County does a ton of that. I do a fair amount, but it isn't 90% of my job. It might be more seasonally this time of year, 40% of my job. So
yeah.
It kind of depends on where we're at in the year and what's going on.
And see, to me, that's crazy. Like for my personal position, summertime is my lull period. Like have my summer camps that run for 1 to 2 months. And then the rest of the summer, I just have to do whatever I want or get caught up on making new, cutouts for my in-class programs. And I personally want to start seeing a shift of me doing more like actual conservation practices to practice what I preach when I talk to kids about this, or have more people out to my wildlife areas. So,
right. I love that point, and I'm not going to talk about it in too much in depth because I would love to talk about that, and it's in a different episode, but that is kind of where when I shifted to wanting to go to grad school was sort of that mindset of practicing what you preach, and not just talking about stuff, but actually doing it and talking about it. So
yeah,
I agree
it has so much more of a larger impact on your audience. And like my life is totally around programming. I don't want to stop doing programming. I want to do things that not only benefit my wildlife, but it benefits my resources that I have to talk to people about. So,
totally.
And a lot of that, since I work with kids 95% of the time, 90% of the time, reading to kindergartners this afternoon. But we talk a lot about animals because that seems to be something that's really easy to get anybody of all ages to grasp onto. Do you talk a lot about animals?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Animals they're when I was a kid, I was the frog kid. And it's cool to come into classrooms and talk about animals and bring things like salamanders and frogs and snakes and turtles in the classroom, and seeing all the little frog kids blossom in their excitement. Something about those live animals, it's exciting. They're cool, and you have really a physical connection with the nature that you're talking about, and it just turns kids' brains on, and you can go and talk and show stuff and bring furs in the classroom, which is all good. But if you have a frog or a living critter in the classroom, that's a different ball game. That can really be an impactful thing to a young student.
Yeah, and even like for a young student to an old student, like I have nursing home programs once a month, and they love the live animals as much as the little kids did. It was so amazing. And it's generally a really good topic just to get anybody, if you're trying to get your public program attendance up, just be like, hey, I have a live snake here. I've realized like you'll get at least 10 new people to come out to your programs, which is kind of crazy. And a lot of people, even if they're not like a nature person or a wildlife oriented person anyway, I feel like whenever they hear about like animals on the news, they're always like more apt to read those articles. I don't know. It just kind of pulls them in. Animals are kind of shitty sometimes though. They kind of suck sometimes too. I love them. People call me Critter Cass, and critters are simultaneously my favorite and my least favorite animals all at once. A lot of them are. So something that I want to consistently do on this podcast is bring up shit animals of the week. I'm hoping that this will be released to start with twice a month, but I'm hoping it'll transition into a weekly podcast. I think that would be really cool. Lord knows there's plenty of content to keep talking about. I think we always show the kids like the really like light and fluffy side of animals, but animals are like are crazy sometimes, and so
you gotta be realistic with it.
What?
When we're talking about animals, you have to be realistic with it. You know, there's good sides and sometimes problematic sides to interacting with wildlife.
For sure. So recently in the news, in Iowa at least, I have what I would call a Midwest mountain lion story, which a lot of us have probably heard about. But I have a couple of shit animals of my week. So the first one is probably going to be that mountain lion. And it itself is not really doing a shitty thing, just walking through. But people's responses to it have been like astounding. I read an article where the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, or the DNR, I think that they're guessing that the mountain lion's probably from the west that has migrated many, many miles over here. Mountain lion's home ranges, I think, are about 100 to 125 square miles. So just for that mountain lion to be driven to walk through central Iowa was crazy. I think it was first spotted in Madison County. And then in Warren, which is where my hometown is, I was sending my mom pictures of it, and she goes, "That's a bobcat." I'm like, "No, it ain't, Chris." So, and then I think it kept going east. I haven't heard much more about it. Even though that animal's just doing its thing, there was no like present danger about it. I think people's responses to it have been hilarious.
Right. I think if I can talk a little bit on the mountain lion situation here in Iowa, and another great topic for a future episode would be Iowa's historic landscape and habitats and wildlife and what it is currently. If you didn't know, Iowa does not have a plethora of large predators like mountain lions and wolves, even though, depending on who you talk to, some people like to say there are. One thing that I have heard from people that I've interacted with and past professors who've done studies and things like that is that the majority, and there's always exceptions to everything in nature, but the majority of mountain lions or cougars that we see in Iowa are young males, juvenile males, who mostly come from the West, probably the Black Hills in South Dakota. Yeah. The litter is born, they grow up, and the established males, for breeding purposes and breeding rights, kick the young males out, and they just start wandering. And like you said, they have huge home ranges. They can cover a ton of miles in a day if they're determined to. And some of those young males head east, and they start walking, and there's not, all of a sudden they're in a sea of corn and soybeans, and there's not a lot of habitat for them. They're kind of looking for love in all the wrong places, and they wander through. It definitely does happen. So it is understood and believed that the majority of confirmed mountain lion sightings, and like 100% confirmed, are young males who are probably from the West, who got kicked out of their home range, looking for a little bit of love and not finding it, and just walking. So yeah. Yeah,
I didn't know that they were mostly males that are going out, which shouldn't be surprising. Like bison herds, there's usually only one dominant male, then the other ones will get fought out, or as an old bull kind of starts to quote unquote retire, like people who manage bison will kind of switch those guys out. And mountain lion are largely solitary animals, so they kind of like to just big chill by themselves. I watch a lot of mountain men too. And so whenever I first heard that, I was like, "Oh, go get me some dogs, start chasing it out to high country." But
there you go.
A lot of people were like concerned for their kids. I like shamelessly scroll through Facebook just to like read shit posting from people or to judge their comments. I never actively comment, but I'm like definitely looking through, and I feel like kind of guilty. I'm like, I'm perpetuating like the toxicity of social media, but I'm sitting there drinking my coffee like, oh, Becky over here, she's going off. And a lot of people were like, oh, they're gonna eat our kids at the bus stop. Like I read that comment on Facebook. And I'm like, dude, just stop.
That'd be wild if that ever happened anytime
Right.
in history. Just large predator statistics with like human confrontation or like human fatality. Like it definitely does happen. And like mountain lions are definitely like, if you're always living in the Mountain West, it's something that you need to be aware of. And there are documented unfortunate interactions between humans and large predators like mountain lions. But like, it's a numbers game, but comparatively to like anything else, there's such a small chance of having a fatal or unfortunate interaction with a large predator compared to things like domestic cattle or horses or dogs or like stinging insects. Like the chances are so small, especially here in Iowa, where there's like, if there is a mountain lion in the state, it's like one, and it's traveling.
Yeah, exactly.
I know, kind of preaching to the choir and talk and then have an echo chamber here, but like, it still blows my mind some of like the fears and myths around animals, especially large predators, that people will talk about. Like, yeah, I've seen all that stuff when there is a confirmed mountain lion or something like that, or a black bear, and people pretty much harass it with trying to take photos of it, but then there's the fear of it gonna come snag your kid. Or I hear the same thing about bobcats, which we do have an established population of bobcats in Iowa.
I know how it is in your corner of the woods, but kind of jumping off mountain lions a little bit, with bobcats, we're able to trap 3 bobcats per season if we're able to here in Southwest Iowa, and I think that's largely the same and consistent for the whole southern part of the state. But once you get north, some people can't trap them at all. So
yeah, bobcats are believed to be present in every county in Iowa, but they have a larger, seems to be, presence in southern Iowa, and also kind of on the eastern or western border running up the Mississippi River Valley and the Missouri River Valley. Yeah. And down in southern Iowa, like you said, there's you can trap 3 per season. I think in Jackson County where I am, it's still only 1, even though over the last 15, 20 years, the bobcat population has really come up since, before then, when there really wasn't much of a bobcat population. And we can talk about bobcats all day long. They're my favorite critters. But
right,
yeah, we
don't
have
cool.
1. But we they're definitely around. But they're, the largest male bobcat is like 35 pounds. That's like a big...
That's a hefty bobcat, yeah.
It's a heavy bobcat. And so what I'm trying to say is they're generally a lot smaller than that. And they're eating rabbits and birds and mice and stuff. And, I've definitely heard people afraid about their dogs getting attacked or the kids being attacked. And not saying that I hear it all the time, but I've definitely heard that working in the conservation office. And it's just sort of one of those things where we already talk about the reality of these critters, but it always kind of makes me roll my eyes a little bit. It's like, yeah, come on. Have you ever heard of a bobcat, like, coming into your yard and snagging a kid out? Like,
right.
Personally, I've never heard it. And I don't know.
Yep, I've never heard that either. I went out hunting one time and there were legitimately 2 bobcats fighting down the creek from wherever I was sitting. And like, I feel like there's no way they didn't know that I was there. And I knew that they were there, and I just, we let each other do our piece, but there were 2 of them and they didn't try to like gang up on me or anything, but they're also pissed off at each other. So.
Right. My favorite bobcat sighting that I've had was I was taking a group of students from the University of Dubuque on an overnight canoeing trip on the Maquoketa River here in eastern Iowa. That's the major river that flows through my area besides the Mississippi River. And we paddled into a paddle-in campsite, one of the campsites that we manage, and it's my favorite campsite that we manage because it's primitive and you only paddle or hike into it.
That's super cool.
And, we spent the night, had a good time, and then on this particular trip, we had no rain, and it was in October, and the fall colors were amazing. And in the morning, we broke down camp, we got in the water, and we were on the water for maybe 15 minutes to a half an hour. We came around a bend, and this part of the river is in really bluffy country, and there's big steep bluffs all the way onto the water. And this kid kind of calls back to me, and we're all in kayaks and in a few canoes, and the kid goes, "Tony, what is that up there?" I'm like, "What are you talking about? What's that animal up there on the bank?" And he's pointing. He's like, "Is that a raccoon?" And then I see some sort of critter and I see this little flash of white. And then I'm like, I see this little tiny bobtail with that flash of white kind of wiggle. And there's this bobcat. And I'm like, oh, that's a bobcat. And it was drinking water. And we kind of came around a bend and it didn't know where we were coming.
Did your kids like kind of shit their pants a little bit? Were they all like, it's going to eat us?
No, they were all college students, and the vast majority of them were environmental science students.
Oh,
so
good,
everyone thought it was cool. And since we were on the water, we were probably only, and it was just happenstance. We just stumbled upon it. But as it came around the bend, we probably got within 5 yards of it. And then it didn't run away, but it got up and kind of slunk up the hill. And we watched it for 15 seconds, and it went over a log and was just gone. And I think all but one kid, I should say kid, he was technically an adult. They're all college students, but all but one person saw it. And this, I don't know, that there's bows to their camouflage. The kid was, 5 yards from the bobcat, and he said, I can't see it. And maybe he had some sort of sight impairment or something like that, wasn't wearing his glasses or contacts. But we all saw it except for Isaiah, which I felt bad about because he was super excited to see it. But yeah, that was cool to see.
It's having those experiences with students, and we'll jump into more of this in a later podcast. It'll largely be a naturalist-based podcast, so we work a lot with the public and students. But it's so interesting having those like really special moments with the kids where they're like seeing something for the first time and they're just blown away by something that you might not necessarily commonly see, like a bobcat, but you're like, oh yeah, it's a bobcat. It's pretty cool. He's just doing his thing, hunting probably, and they're like, oh my gosh, that's a bobcat. It's like they're at the zoo almost. So,
right.
Yeah.
I don't think I was that. I kept my cool, but I wasn't that nonchalant about it. I wasn't like, oh, bobcat, cool. I was like, oh my guys, look. I'm like pointing. I'm like, holy shit, guys, look. And I was with college kids, so my expletives were a little more free flowing with them. Okay.
That's pretty funny. That's awesome. I love to get hyped about really trivial things, and I'm not to be like that old person, but I'm like, kids today, like I feel like it's kind of difficult to get them excited sometimes. Like if we're out on a field trip, they know that it's a field trip for school, and they're excited to come out to, they call it my house. It's not my house, it's the nature center.
Right.
But they come out to my house, quote unquote, and they're like excited for the first 15 minutes, and I'm able to keep their energy up because I'm a hyper excitable person. But like it pisses them off borderline when I get like excited about trivial things.
Right.
Like, I can't even think of a good example right now, but sometimes I'll just get like really jazzed if I found buckeyes one time underneath a buckeye tree, and I was like, oh my gosh, guys, awesome. Look at this. I'm like, yeah, it came off the tree, critter, Cass. I'm like, yeah, but look at these. These are lucky, okay? Keep one in your pocket, take one home to your mama, and they're like, all right, I'm not going to do that, but whatever.
So, it's sometimes you can keep your excitement up, and some kids some students just like magnetate towards that. I don't think magnetate's a real word, but they just like gravitate towards it. And like they get super excited about it if you're excited about it. And then the exact same age group, same grade, different school comes out and it's a different story. Like there's so many factors to engagement with students, especially elementary or just young students, and what works and what doesn't. And so much of it is as nuance with how you're doing it and prepared, how their teachers are, how their classroom culture is. It's a mixed bag. Sometimes I can bring kids out. I'm just going, it's not a big surprise, but I'm a hardcore prairie plant nerd, and like showing kids crazy different types of seeds. And sometimes they're just like, the pupils dilate and they're just going nuts and helping me collect seed. And, his questions other times are like, cool, dude. It's like a seed, on a plant. And I'm just like,
you don't understand. This is indicative to really cool stuff.
Yeah.
So let's jump into kind of like the content and body of the podcast about how we got into being outdoors people to begin with. Because I don't know your growing up history other than you grew up on the farm, but like my parents hate nature and I don't know how I came from them. And then also like how we met on the trip. Let's maybe talk about the trip first, because I think that's, sure. I don't know. I just had a really great experience, and it was something that was extremely new to me with 13 other people who I did not know. So, have you been to Boundary Waters before?
I have been to the area, and I even lived in Minnesota and northern Wisconsin for a few years, but that was my first time being like Ely, Minnesota, Boundary Waters. When I was living up north, I was super poor and underpaid, and I couldn't really afford to drive that far. Yeah, so that was my first time.
Yeah, it was super cool. So the reason why Tony and I got to go on this trip was because through the Iowa Association of Naturalists, Heather Hucka, is that how you pronounce her last name?
Hucke.
Oh, okay. Not even close. Heather Hucke. She works for Cerro Gordo County now. And she's a super passionate naturalist, and she does this trip. She's taken it with other students, and other naturalists have also taken this trip with other students, which blows my mind from a small rural county. Could never do that, to that scale at least. But she offered it as a summer conference, essentially, like a summer trip. Sometimes through the Iowa Association of Naturalists, we will have these periodic seasonal conferences is what I would call them. So Tony just went to one November 3rd, 4th, and 5th, right?
Yep.
Last week. And then I went, my first one was also last fall, but they have seasonal ones. So fall, spring, and then a summer IAN. And there's workshops, but the specific summer one was to mimic an experience that you would take your students on that was backcountry camping, which I thought was amazing. And I love the idea of backcountry camping. However, and I'll talk a little bit more about this because, like, growing up, my parents, if I went camping, was because, like, I had a friend who my parents pawned me off on. And not dogging on my parents, they're great. It just wasn't their thing. And so they could get away with not taking me camping because I had friends who would take me camping. But so, like, I had never got to do that experience if I hadn't have, gone with a group, because I personally don't have the confidence to go and tackle that on my own, So it was just a super cool experience. And if you haven't been to Boundary Waters, we actually had to camp outside of Boundary Waters because it's a capital W wilderness area. So it's protected and you can't have more than, was it 9 heartbeats in that specific area?
Yeah, whatever it was, our group was slightly more than that. So
yeah, so
I think it was 9. Double check though.
Yeah, so if you are ever interested in camping in backcountry or in capital W wilderness wildlife areas, they have different restrictions on the number of heartbeats. And a heartbeat would be like a person, it would be like a dog, it'd be a horse, it'd be whatever you're bringing with you that physically possesses a heart and it beats. That's a heartbeat. So that's to prevent your impact on the environment itself, to keep it a wilderness area. So
right. If you were going into a capital W wilderness situation, there's permits to consider. There's a lot of planning to consider, which is a big part of this workshop. And yeah, like Cass is saying, certain areas limit the amount of heartbeats for impact reasons, but also for the rangers managing that area to know who's in there, who's not, because people can get themselves pretty lost and in trouble in situations and have no idea how many folks are in there at one given time or where they're at. It could potentially and has been bad situations.
Yeah, and and we'll probably talk on this later, but we camped outside of Boundary Waters at, was it Fensky Lake that we were camped on?
Yep, Fensky Lake, and it was a national forest campground. So we were in the national forest, but we were just outside the boundary of the capital W wilderness Boundary Waters. Yeah.
And so even being there, we had a black bear come through camp one night. Tony had a cool experience with it. I woke up, heard it, and I was like, that's something, and then fell back asleep. So
right.
That
was wild. So yeah, this workshop was all about preparing people who are interested in taking people into a situation like the Boundary Waters or different backcountry camping, and all the preparation considerations you have to take part in, the permittation, the logistics, because I would love to take people backcountry camping, but it's more than just taking someone or taking a group. There's a lot of prep that goes into it. And that's what this workshop was all about. And that's how Cass and I met. But yeah, one night we were camping. Well, we were camping, but it was nighttime and we had a lot of rain while we were up there.
Yeah, I would say super wet.
By 50% of the time. We had some couple of good thunderstorms that came through at night too.
Yeah, which helped me sleep a lot. I love a good thunderstorm while I'm camping.
Right.
As long as all my stuff's dry, I'm happy. So
it was early August, and it was our second night up there at our campsite. And we were in a Forest Service campground, and it was sort of we had our cars there. So it was like a group campsite. So it wasn't like where we were camping was backcountry. We weren't roughing it. We were tent camping and stuff, but we had access to vehicles and blah, blah, blah.
And we tried very hard to make it a backcountry experience, though, having our resource, with the exception of the cars that we would not use the bear barrels for, bear bags. We would just toss the stuff in the car. So
Right.
But we still tried to mimic it.
But this campsite had trash cans, right? And other parts of the campground had like bear cans and bear-proof dumpsters. But for some reason, our little site had just like regular aluminum.
Yeah, it was like Oscar the Grouch trash cans. Thought he would pop out there.
Classic Oscar the Grouch trash can. And as we pull into the campsite, there was like a little notice at the entrance that was like last bear sighting and had a date on it. And it was like 3 days before we were there. We're like, oh, cool. So the second night we were camping, I remember a big thunderstorm came through and I was kind of awake because of thunder and wind and stuff. And the thunderstorm was calming down, leaving the area, and it was still a little bit raining, but it was getting calm. And all of a sudden I heard just bang, 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 bang. And
was that from the trash can lids?
Yeah,
okay, because
exactly.
That woke me up too. Yeah.
Something was screwing around the trash cans, and then it was like some pretty loud. I could tell those things were getting like really tossed around, and I'm like I'm from Jackson County, Iowa. I know raccoons. I know what coons sound like, and I'm like, it is bigger than a raccoon. I knew exactly what it was, and bang, bang, bang. So I sat up, and the banging after about a couple minutes had to quiet it down, and I sort of laid back down, and then I was in the far end of camp, and I hear about 10 minutes after the trash can noise calmed down, I heard some movement in camp, and I thought maybe it was someone awake, blah, 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 and I heard kind of footsteps, and there was sort of a little social trail that went right by my tent, down through the woods, down to a different part by the lake, and then I hear this like kind of footsteps, and then I hear and this black bear, and I'm like, oh shit, like this, and like it was right. It used that trail right by my tent. Like I could hear its breath and how they kind of huff while they breathe. Right. It wasn't like it was aggressive or anything. It was just breathing, but I could hear its breath.
It's like me after going up some stairs. It was just like really winded.
So I sat up, and we were really careful about making sure there wasn't anything that smelled in our tents, and everything was locked away because you don't want to habituate a critter that sized or any critter to human smell and food. And
right.
But in my professional mind, I'm like, I know it's a black bear. They're more than likely nothing's going to happen. And like they're super common up here, but like from Iowa, I don't experience a whole lot of black bears.
Right.
And so I sat up in my tent, and I'm like, if my tent moves at all, I'm going to like scream the most like high pitched, involuntary scream that my body can muster, and like, everyone's in front of me.
That scream's coming from your soul. That's where it's coming from.
Right. And it walked by my tent. I heard it, and then I sat. And once it, I couldn't hear it anymore, and my heart was pounding pretty good. And then eventually, I calmed down and got some shallow sleep. And in the morning, I wake up, and there's a few people already awake in camp. And I was like, "How about that bear last night?" And they're like, "What bear?" I'm like, "You didn't hear the trash cans? Like, I heard it walk by my tent. You didn't hear that?" And they're like, "No." I'm like, "All right." Well, then we walked to where the trash cans were to prove it. And the trash cans were immaculate. There was nothing. They weren't at a place. There wasn't any trash on the ground. I'm like, there's no freaking way I dreamt this. Like, right. I know what happened. And they're like, "Oh, we believe you." And I'm like, oh my God, they probably think I'm like a compulsive liar. But turns out some other people from camp who were tents were a little closer to the trash cans. After the bear left, they woke up and cleaned it up just in case it came back or something like that. So yeah. I wasn't crazy. It happened, and it was confirmed. So
right, which is super cool. And I thought that I definitely heard the trash cans pop and crashing and stuff. And I didn't look at my phone or anything to see what time it was. I wasn't wearing a watch. So in my head, I'm like, oh, someone's probably just up really early, and that's not going to be this girl. And so I laid there, and I heard footsteps too. And like after I've talked to like you and other people about it, I'm like, maybe I heard the bear walk past my tent too. Because it was like
right.
that time. And like to get to your tent, he would have had to pass through like another corridor of tents too. So
right. Probably was, yeah. It was like 3:15 in the morning.
Yeah.
I remember I looked at my watch as this whole thing was going on. Crazy stuff.
Yeah. Super cool. And black bears up there at least are seen more of a nuisance, I think, kind of like raccoons are to us. So
yeah, I think they're way more commonplace. And yeah, they're kind of just like a large raccoon that gets in the garbage and such.
Right on. Yeah, I don't know. I thought personally, not to get into like the whole details of that trip to other people who might not care if they weren't on the trip. But up there, it's just beautiful. I had never traveled to somewhere. I went to Colorado for the first time this year, and that was gorgeous. But even going up there was a whole different like spectrum of gorgeousness and beauty of wildlife. And even in the areas that seemed like they were, I don't know, like more towny or right on the edge of town, like you get out on the trail and it's still like, boom, wilderness. It was super cool. Yeah. The landscape was amazing. I felt like I was also climbing mountains through some of those trails too.
Right. Yeah, some of that cool, some of those cool uplifts around the lakes and stuff. And you're right at the edge of the great northern boreal forest and stuff.
Yeah.
And
we had bald eagles follow us the whole trip too. And like, I'm not superstitious, but I'm a little stitious. And I'm like, that's good juju right there. We like it.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I like that. I'm definitely not a superstitious person, but I can get behind some good magic there when we need it. So
yeah, I don't know. To me, I'm like, man, if it makes me feel good, I'm just gonna roll with it. Like that bald eagle made me feel good. Good juju.
Heck yeah.
So yeah. And that trip like did so much for my soul because like growing up, like I was always an outdoor person in a very indoor family. And like I said, that's not dogging on my folks at all. My dad is going to be editing our podcast here. So, Dave, I love you. Dad, you're my favorite. And except for Mom, she's also my favorite. But like it just wasn't their thing. And so anytime that I would get the chance to go outside or while my parents were disc golfing, I'd probably be down in the creek looking for crawdaddies or whatever else might have been in the creek at the time. And so like this trip just did so much for like my childhood soul too. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm doing some like cool exploring shit here. So
right. That's awesome.
Yeah. Like, I don't know. It was just always something that was in me. I'd watch Animal Planet when I was little. And as I got older, any hobby that was outside that I could possibly do, my parents were very supportive in like getting me the resources. If I if I was in high school or middle school and I didn't have like the physical money to go out and get me stuff, Dad would still make sure that I had a fishing pole, or Mom would still make sure that I had a fishing pole, or they would take me to places if I wanted to. It took until I was an adult to get my dad to go like actually fishing with me though, and he just hates fishing, so that's okay. But they were always awesome about making sure that I could maybe do those things that I had wanted to do. And so as I got older and I got big kid money, like I've started to do more things that are what I've wanted to do my whole life. So like I bow hunt now. I love to go out and fish. I tan hides too. I had domestic beetles for a while, and like for processing skulls and cleaning them and stuff. And I'm like, man, this is like, it just feels good. It feels like I'm who I'm supposed to be, which is like, I don't know, one of those like high level, like, I don't know, like one of those high level thoughts that like I feel like it takes a lot of people a long time to get, and I feel like it's taken me a long time to get there, but I'm like, I'm feeling pretty good about the person I've turned into, and it's all because I'm like back out in nature, and it's who I am. That's awesome. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. We're sort of kind of getting to know each other through this process, and I had no idea about kind of your upbringing, your background, and that's awesome that you have become the person that you have become and becoming the person that you will be, and that the natural world and being an outdoors person is a big part of that. That's awesome.
Yeah, and it's like I'm super fortunate that I'm able to like teach that to other people. Like I do a high tanning class in March usually. Last year was our first year doing it, and it went super, super well. I'm excited for this year. So.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's something. God, yeah, let me know about that, because that's something I've always been interested in, and I've done a lot of hunting in my life, but yeah, I've never tanned hide, and that'd be super cool to learn about.
Yeah, and I'm very much like, so I say that I go hunting, and I totally go hunting. I'm apparently not a very good hunter because I've been out for 3 years and have 3 empty bow tags, okay? And that's including this year's, but I'm going to fill them. This year is the year. And that's, yeah, I would say that's largely because I've also hunted a different area for a short amount of time every year that I've gone out, and this has been the first year that I've consistently hunted the same property and have been able to like scout and track the deer a little bit better. There's just a lot of pressure from surrounding farms there right now. So I think that's...
Are you mostly deer hunting, or are you doing other types of hunting as well?
Oh, that's a good question. I went pheasant hunting for the first time last weekend. And that was really fun. We stood up one rooster. I was just like, bird, and didn't shoot it. So I'm actually going out tomorrow with Marty Sutton, who's Adams County's park ranger for Lake Icaria. And so we're going to go pheasant hunting tomorrow, which will be super fun. But I also went out squirrel hunting too. So I've shot a squirrel. And this is definitely one of those things that's new to me, and like new to me being in like the last like year, is actually like ending something's life. And I don't have any like qualms with that necessarily for the purpose of hunting if I'm going to eat it. I don't know if I love like trapping, and if you do, that's completely your thing, and I understand why. Not a lot of people trap anymore because fur prices have gone down the toilet. But like I want to eat the animals that I'm hunting, so it's like a pretty new thing to actually have like ended something's life, and you know, I take solace in that, and I give thanks to the earth for providing me this experience and stuff. That's where I get like a kind of hippie, kind of spiritual, I guess.
Sure.
And that's why I really hope I get to have that moment with the deer this year too. So.
Right. I think it's a good perspective to have, and I have a similar one on hunting, you know, and it is, you know, it's not everyone feels that way, but I personally think it is heavy, and it's a big deal to end something's life, especially if you're, you know, I want to say for all living things, and I believe that, but if you are hunting a large animal like a deer and you take its life, that, you know, that it's for me, it sticks with me, and I have a lot of deer in my day. And not as much as some, clearly. I'm not like a hardcore avid hunter, but I've done a lot of deer hunting, and I have harvested deer, and I will again. But it's never, for me, it's never like a nonchalant thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like it takes a lot, and I think you need to have some emotional consideration when you are doing that, and I think that's an appropriate place to put it. You know, I think you need to think about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what you're going to do with it. You know, I hope more people have that kind of perspective as they get into hunting or continue hunting.
Yeah.
And it's cool to hear about you, someone who didn't grow up with hunting and is now coming into that. But what kind of sparked that in you as someone who didn't have that as part of their growing up?
Yeah, that's a super good question. I think back a lot, because if you would have asked like elementary critter casts, like, hey, like, what do you think about hunting? I would have been like, no, hunting's horrible in all forms. Wah! Like, you know what I mean? I would have been a dramatic fifth grader about that. And then as I started to take conservation and wildlife management courses in college at Northwest Missouri State, a lot of the people who I became like colleagues with and friends with in our studies, they would hunt. And then as we started to learn it as a management practice, it definitely gave me a deeper appreciation for it. And even though I still firmly believe that if humans weren't on Earth, it would be cycling, you know, 100% better than the damage that we've brought to it.
Right.
And the environment doesn't necessarily need us to be a cohesive, functioning system. It doesn't need us. But the fact that we can, you know, assist that kind of thing with hunting and population dynamics, with safe regulations, and the more that I learned about the regulations that are put on hunting, kind of made it like better for me to understand why somebody would want to go out and do it. And the vast majority of hunters that I know and that I associate with aren't doing it for that really nice shoulder mount. That really nice shoulder mount is just because it was a nice shoulder mount that they happen to get from the deer that they're eating, that they're feeding their family with. So having that mindset kind of helped me want to get into it. And then my dad got me a bow in college for my birthday. And it's a nice bow. It's a diamond prism. It's an entry-level bow, but it shoots really nice. I've had people who like to bow hunt have told me like, oh, this is a pretty decent, you know, entry-level bow. And so after I got it because I wanted to go bow fishing specifically. And then the rig for that was also very expensive. So I was like, I wonder if I can't just go get a deer. So I went out and just started shooting. And not to brag, but I think I'm a pretty decent shot with my bow too. And that kind of like made my dad, like, it was a big part of the reason why my dad even got me the bow, because it's something that's like very specific to the individual. So I knew that I was going to be getting a bow. My dad took me to go pick one out, and without getting into like a whole bunch of technicalities, I'm left eye dominant, but I shoot with my right eye because I'm got a noodle left arm because I'm right-handed. So, you know, I'm just kind of a lot of stuff going on in one body. But so I went to go shoot the bow, and I was crossing my face over the string, and I was off from the target, like missed it, but I was still in like that mid-range. Like my horizontal and vertical my vertical was good, but my horizontal was off. And the guy was like, oh, is it because you're shooting with your left eye? And so I just switched eyes, shot with my right one, and like got it pretty much dead on the target. So my dad was like, all right, I think this might be something that you should pursue. So again, he, encouraged me to do that with that kind of thing. So from there, I've like gotten more into guns. Honestly, scare me. They like, I don't know. They just make me nervous. But luckily, like the people who I work with and my boyfriend, he likes guns, and they've made me very comfortable with them now, or getting to be more comfortable. So the fact that I'm even like walking a field with a shotgun felt like pretty surreal last weekend. Because it's something that I wouldn't have normally seen myself doing,
Sure.
So, yeah.
Cool. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for asking. Did your family hunt at all?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Growing up, yeah, I can kind of turn it on and off, but I definitely have some like, I was once, and I think it was an affectionate name calling, but I was once called a hickster when I was by a good friend of mine. So I can kind of turn on and off the folksy colloquialisms and nomenclature and kind of turn on the hick a little bit if I need to. But yeah, I grew up in a pretty rural area in a family that did a lot of hunting. My dad and his brothers used to do a ton of hunting, and some of them still do hunting and trapping and fishing. And I grew up doing a lot of fishing with my dad and my uncles and my grandpa, and catch these big channel catfish. And my grandpa was kind of a crazy fisherman. Some of my uncles are still. And my dad, I've been going hunting with my father, and I still hunt with my father. I think that's one of our biggest connectors still, and probably our biggest tradition with each other is going deer hunting. And I did some other hunting like coon hunting and squirrel hunting and things like that. But when I was a kid, we did, I think the first time he took me hunting, I was like 3 years old. I don't remember it, but and apparently I fell asleep and a big buck came along and he tried to wake me up to see it, but I didn't see it. But I've been hunting with my father for decades, and we always pretty much hunt my dad's farm. I really don't hunt anywhere else, and it's awesome deer country and squirrel country and things like that. But it's been a big part of me, and I with moving up north, I wasn't as into hunting when I moved because it's a different place, and I still came back home to hunt. And then being in grad school the last few years, my hunting has kind of taken a back seat, which I still will go like shotgun hunting and stuff. But next year, I really plan on getting back into bow hunting. And I'm not like I'm not a avid gear junkie hunter, you know. Kudos to you are like a part of me wants to be that way, but I'm just not. But I do want to get more serious about like bow hunting and some of these things. I would love to. I've done some early muzzleloader. I would like to maybe get back into like some muzzleloader hunting and do late muzzleloader for deer and things like that. But kind of one of my favorite hunting stories. Can I tell you a hunting story?
Yeah, of course. Go for it.
Really quick. So you mentioned you went squirrel hunting.
Yeah, that was super fun.
I like squirrel hunting. I haven't done much. I didn't do any of this year, but I like squirrel hunting. And
do you eat the squirrel too?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, perfect. What's your favorite way to cook it? I'm gonna not to interrupt your story. What's your favorite way to cook a squirrel?
Oh, kind of like crock pot and a bunch of barbecue sauce.
Okay, like shredded squirrel, like pork style. Okay.
Shredded squirrel.
Yeah. Okay, go on.
When I was in college, I did a research project on aquatic turtles, and I one time baited my nets with squirrel that I shot, and I caught snapping turtles on squirrel.
That's awesome.
But so one time when I was a senior in my undergrad, I had this awesome situation where I remember it was like Monday. I had classes in the morning, and I didn't have any classes until Tuesday afternoon. So I had this huge chunk of time where I didn't have any classes. And my two best friends from college were the exact same way. So that one semester, my senior year in undergrad, we always would go do stuff. We would like get done with class on Monday, and the three of us would go camping somewhere, hiking somewhere, a lot of times overnight. And we'd go back to school on Tuesday afternoon. You know, we'd go paddling. We'd go to a state park. Sometimes we'd run to Wisconsin and do something cool.
Right.
But one time we went hunting and camping at my dad's farm. and we were out there, and my one buddy and I, we'd done a lot of hunting and fishing growing up. My other friend who was with us, he had never been hunting before. And we were taking him on his first hunting trip, which was squirrel hunting in my dad's timber. And so we set up we camped out, we set up our tents, we went and shot a few squirrels, and we brought some food with us. I remember we found a big hen of the woods mushroom. It was like September, and it was awesome.
Classy, and paired with that squirrel.
Yeah, so we like cooked this big hen of the woods mushroom on the fire. We brought some oil and salt and pepper and a few other spices and butter and a big cast iron skillet. And then we tried like cooking these squirrels over the fire.
Oh.
And like, I remember like, and we've never done that before. We were just kind of digging around, and we cooked these squirrels, and they were like charred black.
Oh gosh.
And you like bite into it, and once you got past that crust of char, it was like freaking raw squirrel. And it was like, no. and then so me and my one buddy, we just like sat there and we ate that hen of the woods mushroom. And we for some reason made a big jar of marinara sauce. I think we were going to pour it on the squirrel or something like that.
Yeah.
So me and my buddy ate this mushroom with chicken of the woods mushroom, or hen of the woods. I forget what I said it was. And we ate it with this marinara, and it was like really rich. And I think we like spent like a lot of time digging cat holes that night. But my buddy, who never had been hunting before, he thought it was like the coolest thing ever. And he ate all those squirrels, man. It was
the raw squirrel?
It was not well prepared. Like, it was,
no. And he's like into it. He's like, this is great.
Oh yeah, he thought it was the coolest thing. I'm glad he had that experience. I'm glad he had a good time. But like, I'm surprised if he didn't get worms. Like,
yeah, no kidding. So the first squirrel that I got, and the only one that I've got, I'm going to be completely real. I hope as this podcast progresses, so does the things that I've gotten and eaten by my own hand. It progresses too. So the first squirrel, I did not eat it. We were squirrel hunting at my boyfriend's family's house, at his parents' house. And I know that contradicts like my big thing. Like, I want to make sure that I'm killing it for a purpose. And so I was completely planning on eating it. But future mother-in-law was like, absolutely not. Michael's grandparents are going to be here in a little bit. You're not gutting that squirrel. So she was not super about it. We could have froze it, I suppose. But she was already like not super thrilled that we were shooting squirrels out in the yard before the family was going to be there. And they live out in the country. So it's not like it was in town or anything. But yeah, I justified it because they was eating the siding on our house, and I was like, okay, I'm solving a nuisance problem, But
you get a big box squirrel, you get like 10 to 20 of those. You have a little crock pot meal ready for you.
I really want to make. So I love Stephen Ranella, and we'll end our podcast with a Stephen Ranella quote. If you're just getting into wildlife or hunting, I'm going to plug him a little bit, just because I personally know that I agree with his philosophy about hunting and harvesting and just his philosophy on life. I haven't heard one thing out of his mouth that I haven't not agreed with, or that I've disagreed with. And so I watch a lot of Meat Eater, and I feel like he provides like a lot of really awesome tips on not only hunting the animal and what you should look for in tracking, but also cooking. He's a big cook guy. So my boyfriend and I, every year we get each other some volume of his cookbooks. Right now we have a couple of them. So I really want to try this squirrel croissant roll recipe that he's done. He did it on the show, but I'm like, man, that looks really yummy. I want to do it. So
the squirrel croissant, that sounds amazing.
Yeah. Like they brine, I don't know, they did in a brine and then wrapped it in a croissant roll with some other like cream cheese filling and jalapenos, and it just sounded real good. And I feel like people who eat wild game, whenever you're talking to people who don't eat wild game and you try to like talk it up to them, you're pretty much trying to make wild game taste not like wild game into something that's, domestic that they would also like. So I don't know. I want to find like a good cooking style to wherever I can still eat the wild game and it be that essence of being wild, but have it still taste good to somebody who might not like to eat squirrel with me. So
right.
I think croissant roll is a happy medium.
It can be a tricky one trying to get your friends to try your game, and I get where they're coming from, and this is also like the wily hillbilly in me, but I like to try to I kind of get off a little bit when someone's like, I won't try it, and I'm like, I will, and
yeah, right, yep.
My big one, and for me it's definitely like a family tradition, and grandma makes the best, and my uncles and my dad do it, and I started making my own. And it's definitely a Christmas thing because it always follows deer season, like for shotgun deer season. But pickled deer heart, man, that's my.
Yeah, you were talking about it on the Minnesota trip too, while we were pulling garbage balsam trees out of the ground. That sounds super cool. I really want to eat the heart of the deer that I get. I have a buck and a doe tag, and I would like to eat the heart of any animal that I shoot. Maybe like any, I guess, big cervid, any big hoofed animal. Maybe not a squirrel heart. I don't know if people do that. Maybe they do. Yeah. But like Stephen Ranella is always like, oh yeah, if you like eat the heart of that animal, supposedly, you get some essence of that animal. Even if you eat like 12 elk hearts, you're getting like something different from each elk heart that you obtain because you have like the memories from that hunt. And like that kind of shit just like sticks with me. I'm like, ooh, like what am I going to get from this, So.
Right. I like that. Kind of develop a personal philosophy around your philosophy and morals around why you hunt and what you're doing. I like that.
Yeah. So, well, awesome. So would you say, and we'll have to kind of start wrapping up here a little bit so we don't get super lengthy, but like, would you say that like hunting with your family made you the nature person that you are today? Or were you also born with that kind of innate, like, oh, I care a lot about the earth?
Right. Oh man, good question. And it's definitely a big part of it. It's just a lot of conjecture and any history and a personal history. But yeah, definitely growing up doing that. When I was a little kid, I was always dad's little hunting buddy and things like that and fishing buddy. And that was a big part of me, growing up and being able to live out on the farm and have our woods and be able to run around outside. It was definitely immensely foundational with me being a conservation professional today. As I got older in high school, I was still did a lot of camping and I still hunted. But when people grow up and get into high school, usually there's social things are a little bit more of a priority. Right. And I was still like outside a lot and not afraid to get muddy and go outside and hunt. But it wasn't a part of my personality as much. I got way into music, and I was like a metal kid. I had long hair for a long time, and I really liked that kind of stuff. But once I got into college, I got back into it, and yeah, it was definitely a big part of me. And another big part of how I got to be kind of an environmental outdoorsy person is when I was younger, before we moved out to the farm, we lived really close to E.B. Lyons Nature Center in Key West, Iowa. We're outside of Dubuque, Iowa.
Oh, okay. And
we could walk to the nature center there, and they had, it was a classic old school nature center, and it's still there. The inside doesn't look the same as it did when I was a kid. But I have to give, besides my father, I have to give a lot of credit to Wayne Buchholz, who worked for the Iowa DNR. He's since retired and works at the National Mississippi River Museum in Dubuque. But when I was a little kid, he's the one who called me the Frog Kid, and I would come in.
Oh, that's awesome.
I always bring Wayne like a toad or a tree frog, and he just always acted like it was this cool discovery and made me feel like I did an awesome thing, even though it was like just another toad, and I just loved looking at the turtles and snakes that they had in the tanks there. My mom tells a story about how I must have been in preschool or pretty young, because I wasn't in regular school, and we were at the nature center once when a field trip of school children came through, and apparently I was like super like protective of the aquariums. Like, I wouldn't make room for the other students, and I was there with me. I like posted up in front of the tanks and just like wouldn't move. And there was a salamander tank, and this one kid goes, "Look at the lizard." And apparently my mom says after the kids said, "Look at the lizard," I like crossed my arms and like looked him dead in the eye and said, "It's not a lizard, it's a salamander," and just like got all like bucky about it.
Yeah.
So
you peasant.
You knew. With my father growing up hunting and fishing and camping, and also with when I was really little, having such immediate access to E.B. Lyons Center and having Wayne as someone who, gave me space and attention with things like frogs and nature-y stuff, that was definitely foundational when it comes to who I am today.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that you gave like your local nature center a shout out to, like from your childhood. What was the name of that nature center again?
E.B. Lyons Nature Center. It's within the Mines of Spain State Recreation Area, right outside Dubuque, Iowa. And currently, Dubuque County Conservation staffs the E.B. Lyons Nature Center. It's a cool nature center. Check it out. It's a beautiful area.
Amazing. My childhood nature center was the Annette Nature Center in Warren County, Iowa, which is right across from like Aquabi State Park where I worked. And that's why, even though I worked for the state, I would still use the Conservation Board's resources and their programs and things in their boxes and back rooms, you know, for my programming out at the state park. But the Annette Nature Center was a super like pivotal point of like my childhood upbringing. We would only go out there in 4th grade, and then I was in Girl Scouts for a short time growing up before I was like, I'm tired of selling cookies, Mom. So, you know, but I would go out there for Scouts and then for my one trip in 4th grade. But it was always like just the best place to go and be. So,
right.
Yeah, super neat.
Cool.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's to kind of close out here. I feel like at least for me and the person that I am and who I've grown into being, like I've had to break a lot of barriers, whether that's like a negative, like a constraint type thing, like a barrier that I would say that like I've broken in a negative impact. It's just that I didn't, you know, I didn't have like anybody directly close to me to go out and take me to do these things. Like today, I take one of my friend's kids out. He's 12, and I take him and do these things that I wanted to do whenever I was 12. But some things like I didn't have anybody to go and do it. So, you know, that I don't mean negative in like a super bad, like traumatic childhood way. I mean, in like if I would have been able to do this sooner, I think I'd be better at it now as a 25-year-old woman. You know what I mean? But then other barriers to me and like things that have like just changed my life or some, how do I want to word it? Maybe barrier is the wrong word, but like something else that has like changed my life is I like went and experienced it. And I was like, okay, from this point on, like nothing else is going to remain the same. Like for recent times, like that Minnesota trip was that pivotal moment. So have you had any of those, or like what's a favorite hike you've been on that like really made an impact on you that you were like, okay, this is here I got to take away from it. And it could be something like super small, or it could be something that's like monumentous, you know?
Right. Oh man, that's good. You know, there's definitely many of those and at like different levels and stuff like that. One I would say recently was on my wife's and I's honeymoon. We went to the snowy mountains in southeastern Wyoming, and we hiked Medicine Bow Peak, and that was one of the coolest hikes of my life. And it kind of reinvigorated me to, you know, to keep on keeping on with like an environmental or conservation career. And it can be kind of doom and gloom sometime when we're talking about natural resources, the environment. And it can be like, so we have cool jobs. We go outside and do cool stuff, like knowing the issues that are happening and continue to happen and could happen, like can be really freaking depressing. So that was a recent one that really transformed me. But I think historically was going out with my mom when I was a little kid to the Mines of Spain, to the E.B. Lyons Nature Center. And there was a little chapel out there that you could hike to. It was a super short hike, but when I was a little kid, it was this huge hike, and we would go there, and it was like this big physical endeavor, and you're walking through the woods and the prairie, and you know, and like picking raspberries. It was like just doing those things, doing that, but doing it kind of frequently. I think was that big, like I don't know if it's a switch, but it made it a pattern. It made it something that we did regularly. It kind of got into the fabric of my personhood. So I think if that's the kind of answer you're looking for, but I think
for sure
that place, man, my growing up on the farm is also the exact same thing, but as a very, very small young child, like ages 3 to 6, like my dad and my mom taking me outside and taking me on those hikes to the nature center. That definitely had it imprinted on me for sure. Yeah,
that's awesome. I guess my answer to like my own question to you, I'll kind of talk a little bit about it too, because it's also like what made me the person that I am today. And So I think it's really interesting because like all of my like pivotal moments from a childhood where I was like, okay, this is like something that's completely new to me is all also in Dubuque and Bellevue, Iowa. So on that same side of the state. And that's just because I don't have family down here in Southwest Iowa. So even though I live here now, I'm not dogging on it. It's just I have family over in Bellevue and Dubuque area. But so when I was little, a big person in my life who's not an outdoor person, but my grandma Barb, she's amazing. So she listens to this. You're great, G Barbs. But she was always on it to make sure that I would like get out with her and travel. And I was the only grandkid who had ever stayed with them. And so we had a really special bond. We still do. But she would take me to Bellevue State Park when we went up there. And I remember the first time that I went to Bellevue State Park, we saw, we overlooked like this bluff that you could see the Lock and Dam in Bellevue, which was just right down the street from my great-grandma's nursing home or retirement home. And it was beautiful. There were birds soaring. I couldn't tell you what they were at the time because I was like, I don't know, 8 or 10. And then we kept walking up, and she started pointing out these hills, these like weird little humps amongst the other hills, and those were burial grounds, which was super cool. It wasn't the effigy mounds, but it was they were something similar, not in the animal shapes, but there were some remnant of our indigenous cultures that were once there, and that stuck with me. And as we're admiring and talking about the history of the people who used to live there, a bald eagle like came out of the trees right in front of us, and like that whole moment is still ingrained in me. And then my grandma took me down to a rock shop where I got some rocks from the area too. So like all of it, like every little part of that trip has just stuck with me. And it was like from that point where I was like, man, nature's neat. Thanks, Grandma. So
that's awesome. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for sharing all your stories too. If you are listening and you have any like really cool stories that you think that have kind of shaped you into the person that you are today, or if you've even just had like an aha moment, please email us at the Crossing Streams podcast at gmail.com. And I would really love to hear your stories, or if you have something that you want us, if you have a question for us that you want us to talk about, like my question for Tony was, what was your favorite hike and why did it stick with you? Like if you have a cool moment like that would pertain, shoot me those questions, and you can be like the listener story or question of the week, and I'll share your story just like we're sharing ours, and continue to build this really neat community. So do you have anything else that you want to add, Tony?
Well, I just want to say, I'm really excited to start this project with you, and I hope that we continue on with it. And I'm excited. I'm already like brainstorming like different topics in different areas. And, as we continue to do it, we'll get better and more polished. And I'm excited to see where this will take us, into the
For
future.
sure.
So
yeah, I couldn't agree more. If you stuck with us through this whole thing, whether that's in support of one of us or if you've just stumbled upon it on our streaming platforms, which will come, I'll let you know in the next podcast and wherever. So like as the podcast progresses, you can follow us at the Crossing Streams podcast on Instagram. And, as we start to get further into the show, we'll have set themes and we'll have guest speakers on and things like that too. So it won't be so much background. So if you've stuck with us this far, thank you. Whether you've been in support of Tony or me, or you've just stumbled across us on a streaming platform, this is a very, pilot introducing ourselves and just kind of what made us the nature-based people we are today. So, yeah.
Cool.
Super cool. All right. I'm going to end on a quote here from Stephen Ranella, who I've mentioned in this podcast already. He's an amazing writer as well. And whenever you hear him talk and whenever you hear him speak on the show, it's just amazing. I think his words are so intentional. So I'd like to share one quote that stuck with me. Maybe stalking the woods is as vital to the human condition as playing music or putting words to paper. And I thought that was a pretty cool quote. So
love that.
Yeah. Alrighty, well, thanks for crossing streams with us. Remember to always cross streams with a buddy and leave only footprints. We'll see you later.
Thanks for listening to Crossing Streams. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to tell all your friends and follow us on Instagram at the Crossing Streams Podcast.